My name's Steve Miller. A lot of people might know me as Mr. Margie Miller. You know God has a sense of humor when you've been here 6 months and you're hoping to have a low profile and the pastor asks you to do a video. I think the thing that I've felt compelled to say is when I experience the presence and counsel of God. And sometimes that's inspiration, and sometimes it's correction, and sometimes it's guidance. But when you really get it is when life is nuts and God kind of puts his hand on your shoulder, or he kind of touches your heart. And it kind of lights up like an ET. And he says, everything's going to be all right. I've got you covered. I'm giving you my peace right now. And that's when you get it, and that's joy. What's an old guy's story about when I had an experience in my life like this? Life is nuts when your kids are little. And hang in there, young families, God's got you covered. But when our kids were both less than 4, our fathers were also dying of prostate cancer for 2 years. They ended up dying 6 weeks apart. And our mothers were pretty much decompensating. So if we were a sandwich generation, this was like a hot panini press. And it was kind of a wild time. Now, because I'm always the first person to get up in the morning, I usually feed whatever animal we have. And then I have about 10 or 15 minutes where I have a little time of devotion and prayer, and I'll read a devotional and pray. And that particular morning, this morning before my dad died, I got up and the devotion was about shifting our desires from our own to Christ. So I read through that devotion, and then my daughter, who just turned 4, comes up and hops on the couch next to me and asks me to read to her from her kid's Bible, which was not uncommon because I used to read to them all the time from all kinds of stuff. And we're reading, and right there she makes a commitment to Christ. And then the next day my dad dies. So that's a crazy contradiction. So I said, well, what's that about? And then I think about their lives, and I'm like, my dad was one of the most funny and charming people I've ever met in my life, and yet he said to me at one point, if you've never had suicidal thoughts, you've never really lived. And then my daughter, who's probably done more good for more people than I'll ever do in my whole life, has had an incredible journey of a waxing and waning in her faith. So those are more contradictions. So where does all this go? So I think here's the deal. God slaps us in the face all the time with things that just make us want to be grateful. You know, whether it's sunrises or starlit nights or being at peace with your family when nobody's arguing over the holidays or whatever it is. But then we have these times that are really pretty rough. And God uses those times to make us into the people that he wants us to be and to remind us that he's there with us. And the things that are most painful for us are sometimes the things that he's using for our best interests. So what happens is we gradually learn to praise God or thank God for all the good stuff that's obvious. And then we learn to thank God for the hard times. And then we kind of gradually move toward that position that Paul was at, where he's in prison and he says, rejoice in the Lord always. And the peace of God that makes no rational sense will be with you.